My name is Gabor Maté. I'm a medical doctor, no longer working as a physician. I'm traveling and speaking based on my 4 books that address addictions, mind-body health, parenting, child development, and ADHD. And I facilitate seminars, lead some healing retreats, and I speak to a lot of people across North America. Well, it's Almas or Hamid Ali who stresses that in us there's an innate drive for truth. Truth not to liberate us, although it will. Truth not because it's interesting, although it is, but just truth for its own sake. And if I look at my own trajectory as a medical doctor and then writer, it's all about what is the truth of things. What is the truth of illness? What is the truth of addiction? What is the truth of mental health or mental illness? And of course, to deal with something and to help people with a problem, you have to know what the truth of that problem is. But I just find the truth in itself a value. And I would say that my own personal development has all been that search for truth. And of course, I've taken all kinds of detours and blind alleys have popped up and so on. But I really have been committed to truth. I can say that now with some satisfaction. Far from having attained it, I'm not saying I've got there. I'm just saying that that's been a motivative force behind both my personal work and my professional work. And I just find that intensely vital in a sense that it really is life-affirming and life-giving, and it releases all kinds of energies that I appreciate. First of all, I don't know what an Eckhart Tolle or Hamid Ali might say about this, or Adyashanti, but they might say something like, the seeking itself is a stance of deficiency, because you're saying you haven't got something. In other words, you're not in touch with your own wholeness. So you're creating more problems for yourself by positing yourself as a seeker. That's one way to look at it. I'm not sure that's what they would say, but I've heard similar statements. Seeking, as long as it's in the service of truth, is great. If it's in the service of certainty, it can be a limitation. So people can use that truth-seeking both to deepen their relationship to reality or to actually limit their relationship to reality. And I think it's a California-based Buddhist teacher, psychologist John Welwood, who talks about what he calls a spiritual bypass. And I've seen a lot of people using a spiritual bypass to get away from themselves. So that the so-called spiritual seeking itself and the seeking of transcendent experience and the self-definition as a spiritual seeker can be a way of avoiding contact with their truer selves, even though it's being done in the name of contact with the truer self. And particularly in the realm of illness, and given my conviction and my findings over and over again, that illness is an expression of the avoidance of truth on the emotional level. Some people can displace dealing with their emotions by putting all their energy into finding the spiritual truth, and that's what I believe Welwood calls spiritual bypass. And what that means is that those people will have beautiful deaths, but shorter lives, because by not dealing with the emotional reality, they're disabling their immune systems and their hormonal apparatus, and they're interfering with the energetic expression of who they are, and with that means interfering with their cardiovascular system, their nervous system, and so on. So it all depends on what we mean by spiritual seeking. And we do have this separation, particularly in the West, of if we're spiritual seekers, does that mean we're not supposed to be angry anymore? Does that mean that we have to be serene all the time, which is just a way of emotional repressing yourself. So, I would regard myself as a spiritual seeker in the sense that I keep looking to people like Almas, like Adyashanti, to learn things from and to give me guides to understanding myself better, understanding my relationship to the world better. But at the same time, the work has to be done on multiple levels, and if it's only on the spiritual level, it can be a real restriction of our full experience. It's not radical to say that addiction is an expression of spirituality, but it's, again, a limitation to just put it that way. I think addiction has multiple dimensions. It's got physiological dimensions, emotional dimensions, social and relational dimensions, cultural dimensions, and certainly the spiritual one. Now, these are all related. It's not like there's here and there and there and there. These are all related. Fundamentally, in addiction, there's always significant emotional and psychic pain. So addictions are always an attempt to escape from pain based on life experience when we were vulnerable and helpless and small. It is also an expression, as a result of that early pain, we've become disconnected from our sense of unity and wholeness. So there's a spiritual void. So the addictions are an attempt to somehow satiate and fill that spiritual void. It works on many, many other levels. Certainly one can show that it works on a level of brain physiology, that there's certain disordered brain circuits that are both predate and are then exacerbated by continued addictive behavior. So it's, what I say about addiction is like you can only understand it if you take a really kaleidoscopic approach to it, and every time you see something, shake up the kaleidoscope again and look again. And you're going to see something different, but it's all going to be part of the larger picture. And again, spirituality, emotions, physiology, and many other factors all go into what addiction is. So on the spiritual level, certainly it's an emptiness and a disconnect from, not from belief, but from faith. And a lot of people with addictions have all kinds of religious beliefs, but they have no faith whatsoever. Because as soon as you have faith, what does that mean? It means that you're connected to Source, in which case, why do you need to add anything else to that? So genuine faith precludes addiction, and addiction means that there's no faith. But there can be all kinds of religious belief. Addiction is very much a modern phenomena, and it has to do with dislocation. So when people are dislocated from their connection to themselves, from their connection to tribe, to culture, to clan, to society, from their land, from their home, that's when addictions happen. So there's been drinking in Western society for a long time, thousands of years as a matter of fact. I mean, drinking was known to the ancient Greeks. And there was cults around drinking even. The Dionysian cults involved a lot of drinking. But you can't say that there was much addiction on a social level. Because you can drink and get drunk without being an alcoholic. And people would even use alcohol for spiritual purposes. So, or if you look at North America, you have the native population that used peyote in some areas, used alcohol in other areas, used tobacco almost universally, perhaps other psychedelic plants, but they're using them ceremonially. Now the ceremonial use of a substance is the direct opposite of its addictive use, because addictive use is all about seeking oblivion, seeking separation, seeking hiding from reality. Ceremonial use is about connection, about gaining more access to what's real and what's greater than the self. Addiction is all about serving the self or forgetting it. Ceremonial use is all about opening to a greater self. Now, Why wasn't there addiction here in North America, even though there were substances here that could have been used as addictive outlets? Because dislocation hadn't happened yet. Now with contact or colonization, there's a tremendous and traumatic and rapid dislocation of the native population. They're dislocated from the land, literally. Not just dislocated once, but serially dislocated. No sooner is one treaty signed than they're again forced to leave the new treaty lands and move into more restricted and straitened circumstances. Their spiritual ways are forbidden to them, so they're dislocated from their culture. They're taken away from their families, residential schools, and all that. Now you have, in my country, Canada, or in your country, the US, huge problems with addiction in the native population, amongst the population that didn't know the meaning of the word because of dislocation. Or you can look at China today, where 50 years ago there was virtually no addiction. Now it's getting worse and worse all the time because of the rapid economic changes that the culture cannot keep up with. People are being dislocated in their multiple millions from their lands, from their villages, moved into cities. The rivers are being dammed, villages are being flooded. Increasing problem with addiction and all its negative consequences like HIV transmission and so on. So the real driver of addiction on a social level is dislocation. Or in England in the 18th century, it was the rise of industrialism and the dislocation of people from the villages into the big cities, away from their homes, away from their families, into the factories. That's when the gin craze started. That's when alcoholism really began to be a severe social problem. Again, it's Almas who says that the biggest calamity is not what happened to you as a child, but that as a result of what happened, you lost the connection to yourself. So that lost connection to yourself will have many potential outcomes, one of which is addiction. It's not the only one, but certainly is one of them, one of the major ones. And it's always about separation from your essence, from other people, from society, from culture. The reason we suffer is because our true nature cannot be expressed under circumstances that deny our true nature. If we're wired for disconnect, we wouldn't suffer when we're disconnected. So it's just the opposite. We're wired for attachment, we're wired for connection, for belonging, for unity. That's how we're wired. And I think our suffering occurs when our true nature cannot manifest itself. Studies in mice recently have shown that you can traumatize the grandfather and the trauma, the anxiety, will still show up in the grandson. Even though the grandfather never met the grandson. Not that mice don't have much to do with grandparents anyway. But it's passed on biologically. Not genetically, but biologically. And that's the same with human beings as well. I don't know about healing past generations. People talk about that. The native Indians, Aboriginal people in North America, and I work with them a lot because of my work with addictions and illness, they talk about healing the ancestors, ceremonially. When we heal ourselves, we're healing the whole generations, going backwards. I appreciate that thought. I don't really have a way of making sense of it in terms of my own way of thinking. But I know that healing can certainly happen amongst people who are alive and in touch with each other, primarily by everybody getting in touch with themselves. And that's what healing is. And then the word for healing itself comes from the Anglo-Saxon word wholeness, for whole. So healing is wholeness. And that means integrating all the parts of yourself and not having it just what R.D. Laing called the divided self. You know, so that we're actually whole, which we are, but we don't recognize it. So healing is actually recognizing our wholeness. And by the way, when we do, then we realize that nothing was ever broken, and if nothing was ever broken, therefore there was nothing bad that ever happened to us. Because I mean, if it did, you know, if our wholeness was never destroyed, then there was no damage. If there's no damage, then there's no sinners and there's no perpetrators. Well, I think first of all, you have to look at that question both on an individual and on a social level. So, it's quite all right for you and I to sit in sunny San Jose at a well-appointed hotel and talk about our sense of victimization, in quotation marks. It's quite different being a black sharecropper or uneducated place in some town where there's still racial discrimination and economic inequality and severe police control, as we know is the case over many places in the United States. So there are people who genuinely are victimized, not just by social values, but by social structures. We're all victimized in a sense by social values and cultural dislocation, but some people are specifically and more severely victimized. So we have to make that distinction. Now, how do you stop being a victim? You stop being a victim when you're no longer at the effect of what's being done to you or what has been done to you. So on a social level, for example, in a place called Ferguson, where this young man was killed, and there's been all this social movement against that, and people demonstrating and coming together, supporting each other. So they're saying we're not going to be victims anymore. We refuse to be at the effect of how you see me. I'm not going to see myself the way you see me, and I'm not going to behave like you see me. And I will not be intimidated by how you see me. So on that level of social oppression, there has to be a social response. Then there are many people who come from such backgrounds who end up being in jail, and then they somehow participate in a meditation program. And all of a sudden, there's a movie called The Dharma Brothers, which is about a Vipassana meditation program in a southern maximum security prison. And these people, after 10 days, have completely flipped around their view of themselves and of life. They dropped a lot of hostility, rage. They have much more respect for themselves. And nothing about their external circumstances have changed. What changes their perception. So if that's available to people in a maximum security prison under terrible conditions in a southern jail, it's certainly available to the rest of us. It's a question, are we going to avail ourselves of that work, and are we going to put ourselves in the presence of teachers that can lead us there? So victimization is not just what happens to us, it's actually how we respond to what happened to us, and to what extent we allow ourselves to be defined by it, by what happens. Yeah, so the question of devotion and passion versus addiction, and particularly as regards the guru-devotee relationship. So you can never tell from the outside, or at least not superficially, what is addictive behavior and what is simply healthy behavior. You can look at two people jogging in the street. One of them could be jogging because they just find it's beneficial to their health. They're in better shape, they feel better about themselves, it's a way of releasing energies that have built up. It makes them happier and more connected. Somebody else could be jogging out there at the same pace, at the same time, who's jogging out of addiction. Because for them the exercise is to escape from themselves, to escape from their personal relationships where they're having difficulties. How do we tell the difference? It's not in the external behavior, it's the internal relationship to it. And so the real question of addiction, and addiction is any behavior that one craves, finds some pleasure or relief in temporarily, but has negative long-term consequences. So, when it comes to the guru-devotee relationship, the question is, first of all, are there negative consequences? And if so, can't you know, an addiction is an addiction when you can't give it up despite the negative consequences. So, in some guru-devotee relationships, there could be a mutual addiction. the addict, sorry, or the devotee might need the guru to fill a hole in their life, just as the guru might need the devotee. Because if I'm not a guru, who am I? And I've certainly experienced that. Like when I go on speaking trips and I speak to hundreds of people, you know, in cities over a week, you know, I speak to a couple of thousand people, and then I go home and I feel a kind of emptiness. Well, that's my addictive side there. Even though when I was there, I spoke the truth and I helped people and people were inspired and grateful. I get home, I'm irritable and empty. That's because I'm needing that to fill me. And that's an addictive relationship to work that in itself is good. It's very interesting with spiritual teachers just how often there's actually exploitation that happens. A very famous Roshi who just died at the age of 104 in California. Very famous people, his acolytes. A couple of years ago it was reported in the New York Times that he's been groping women who are coming to him for decades. And his followers would say to the woman, why are you so attached to your body? If he wants to touch your breast, let him touch your breast. So in the name of spiritual liberation, they're actually advocating that women should subject themselves to sexual exploitation. The amazing thing is that this guru, this Roshi, was actually a highly accomplished spiritual practitioner. I myself attended one of his retreats, a 10-day retreat. He's a deep speaker, he's clearly had deep spiritual experiences, but clearly there was some emptiness with him that had to be filled by his control over or access to women's bodies. So you can have this amazing spiritual insight. And you know, one could name half a dozen examples of that, of very famous, revered spiritual teachers who are no longer alive, but who still have many, many, many followers who revere them and recall them with absolute gratitude and devotion, but who were alcoholics, serial sexual exploiters of their female clients, or their male clients for that matter. So just because you've got a lot of spiritual insight and you've even attained certain spiritual states, as long as you're incomplete and you're not aware of your incompleteness and you don't accept it, then there's the risk of you're going to use anything to fill yourself with. So that could be the sexual contact, it could be simply that people are listening to me and they love me. So you can be both an effective guru and an abject addict at the same time. And so at the same time, you can also have spiritual teachers who really are integrated, in that either they have found their wholeness or they're completely aware of their lack of wholeness. So they're not going to try and use others to complete themselves. They'll just be looking to find themselves, even as they teach others. And from the outside, although energetically you can usually tell what's going on if you're sensitive enough, but just by looking from the outside, it's sometimes difficult to tell the difference. Well, there's a lot of programming, you know, and we're trained very early. And we're trained not even by people who have any ill intentions, but just people who are themselves emotionally defended or suppressed or spiritually blind. And then in order to maintain our parents, or in the case of my children, me. And so we train our kids not so much through our intentions, which are usually really good, but who we are actually able to be in their presence. And then they have to adjust to who we are. They have no choice but to adjust to who we are. So a lot of the training is unconscious. It's done by unconscious people to people who in turn, their turn will be unconscious. So certainly healing has to do with consciousness. And that's why the teachings of Hamid Ali and other pioneers, you might say, is so crucial. Because it's all about undoing the programming. And Hamid Ali says somewhere that liberation is actually the temporary freeing of the personality from the past. So you can actually be in the present. And, you know, now some people maybe are able to be always in the present. I'm not one of them. But I'm certainly able to be in the present much more than I used to be able to. When I say be present, I mean consciously present. So clearly there's some healing capacity that stays with us and is a part of us, and which allows us to let go of the past, not react the way I was programmed, not be upset what I used to be upset about, not interpret things the way I used to interpret them, but just to look freshly at every moment and see, well, what is actually going on here, without implicit memories and programmed assumptions governing my reactions. But that's the work. The work is to liberate ourselves from the past. I hesitate to talk about those terms because I cannot say that I've consciously had any kind of an enlightenment experience. You know, I know people who've had these direct experiences where it's all energy and they realize that everything is an illusion except the energy and the unity. I know, my wife has had such experiences, and that's what I call an enlightenment experience. I have not had those experiences, so I don't use those words I don't want to teach people what's something that I cannot be confident that I've had the experience of. So I teach people and I speak about what I have experienced. So enlightenment also could be just the capacity to be in the present moment without assumptions, without imposing interpretations. Well, that I can say, you know, I've had some experience of. But because I certainly don't perceive myself as a spiritual teacher, I don't use those terms very often. It's not my language, and it's not where I lead people. Well, you know, there's always the question of what's really going on. You know, like I don't have any fresh new universal questions. I mean, you know, the Greek playwrights asked every question there's to ask in terms of the global, universal dilemma of human life. So I could repeat those questions, and yeah, I'd love to know precisely how the universe got started, or I'd love to know precisely what will happen to me, or the energies that currently are associated with this particular body. What will happen to all that when I'm no longer amongst the living? But I don't concern myself with those questions too much, you know. But the question that I keep always asking is whether I'm looking at society, whether I'm looking at politics, whether I'm looking at myself, anybody I'm working with or interacting with, just what's going on here. And that's a fresh question every moment. And it's never answerable 100% certainty until one has a direct experience of it. And then usually the answer is there's nothing going on, you know, but I'll leave that to people who've had that experience. So I think the key issue is the curiosity, is the ongoing inquiry about just what is the nature of what is occurring. Well, I think, let's go back to what I said before, people have an innate yearning and affinity with the truth. And I have in my own way, in the areas that I've studied and experienced and researched and thought about, I'm capable of speaking some important truths about human health, about addiction, about how the mind develops, about how we interact or react with the world or react to the world. I can speak some truth about that people recognize as truth. So that's why they come. Just as I will go and listen to somebody who, for me, can speak such truths, or I'll read their books, or I will seek out their teachings. So I think it's that universal, and even though not universally realized, not universally experienced, but universally present nature of us that is simply wanting the truth, wanting itself, as Almas would say, I think. So, you know, I've been given some gift with that. I know that I have. It's a gift in the sense that I've honed it and I've worked at it, and I can, if I need credit, I can give it to myself for that. But really, it's a gift. And to the extent that I'm able to manifest it, people naturally want to gravitate towards it. In other words, they're seeking their own truth. And they perhaps believe, and I think rightfully, that I will be of some support to them in seeking their truth. That's why people are at this conference. That's why people here listen to anybody here speak.